Working as a waitress on a cruise ship, I nearly dropped the tray in my hands when I saw him. There, sitting at one of the lavish tables in the dimly lit dining hall, was a man who should not have been alive. A man I had buried 7 years ago. I took a shaky step forward, my mind spinning. My heart slammed against my ribs, and for a moment I thought I might pass out. But I had to be sure. I had to know if my eyes were playing tricks on me. I approached and said, 7 years ago, I had never been happier. The news of my pregnancy had turned my quiet life upside down in the best way possible. Twins. Liam and I had always talked about having kids. We had dreamed of it, planned for it. But this was more than we had ever imagined. Sitting in our cozy living room in Denver, I watched as Liam's face shifted from disbelief to uncontainable joy. His blue eyes sparkled as he ran a hand through his thick brown hair. Twins? He repeated, his voice cracking with emotion. We're having twins? I nodded, my cheeks aching from smiling so much. Can you believe it? Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. Let us know what you think about this story. Liam pulled me into his arms, his breath shaky with excitement. I cannot believe this, Emily. This is everything. Everything. We had everything we needed, each other, a little house in the suburbs, and now, a future filled with baby names and late-night lullabies. For the next week, our days were consumed with nursery plans and baby shopping lists. Liam joked about learning to change 2 diapers at once, and I spent hours picking out soft blankets and tiny clothes. We had no idea how we were going to afford it all, but it did not matter. We were happy. And then, just as suddenly as our joy had come, it was ripped away. The call came late in the evening. The golden glow of the setting sun painted streaks of orange and pink across the living room walls. Liam had gone out for a quick grocery run, and I had stayed home, my hand resting absent-mindedly on my still flat belly. I had been daydreaming about our future, imagining our kids running through the yard, when the phone rang. I picked up. Hello? My voice was calm, unaware that my world was about to shatter. Mrs. Carter? The voice on the other end was clipped, official. Yes, I said hesitantly. Who is this? I am calling about your husband, Liam Carter. There was a pause, just long enough for my stomach to drop. There has been an accident. The words made no sense at first. An accident? Liam? My mind could not process it. He had just gone out to pick up a few things. How could he have been in an accident? But the voice kept going, filling the silence with cold, clinical details I did not want to hear. His car veered off the road. We have searched the area, but we have not recovered his body. The world tilted. My breath caught in my throat. I do not understand, I whispered, my grip tightening on the phone. What do you mean you cannot find him? The voice softened, but the words did not. We believe the current may have taken the car into the river. It is likely the body was carried away. My knees buckled, and I collapsed to the floor, clutching the phone like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. Liam. Gone. Just like that. No. No, this could not be happening. This had to be a mistake. But the tone in the officer's voice told me otherwise. The days that followed were a haze. There was no closure, no body to bury, no final goodbye. Just an empty space where my husband used to be. Friends and family tried to comfort me, but there were no words to fill the void he left behind. And then, when I thought things could not get any worse, they did. It started with a knock at the door. I opened it to find a man I did not recognize. He was tall, with sharp features and an impatient air about him. His suit was crisp, but his expression was anything but friendly. Mrs. Carter? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Yes? I am here to collect the debt your husband owed. Debt? I frowned. I do not understand. What debt? The man's lips curled into a humorless smile. And just like that, my nightmare got worse. Your husband owed a substantial amount of money to some, let us say, less forgiving lenders. And now, since he is no longer around to pay it, that responsibility falls to you. My blood ran cold. Liam had never mentioned any debts. We were not rich, but we had always managed. How could this be possible? I do not have any money, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. The man's smile did not waver. That is not my problem. You will find a way, or else. And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway, stunned and terrified. The weight of the world seemed to press down on me from all sides. I was pregnant, alone, and now burdened with a debt I had no way of paying. The life Liam and I had dreamed of together was gone, replaced by a nightmare I could not escape. As the days dragged on, I tried to stay strong for the sake of my unborn children. But with each passing moment, the reality of my situation became harder to ignore. I was alone, and the world was closing in on me. In the months that followed, my life became a relentless cycle of fear and exhaustion. The joy I had once felt at the thought of becoming a mother was overshadowed by the crushing weight of the debt Liam had left behind. I had no idea how deep he had been in, and now, with every passing week, it became painfully clear that I was in way over my head. The phone calls started first, cold, anonymous voices reminding me of the money I owed. Every time the phone rang, my heart pounded, panic seizing me until I mustered the courage to answer. Each conversation was the same: threats, impatient demands for payments I could not make. I tried to explain, again and again, that I did not have the money. I am pregnant, I would say, hoping for some shred of compassion. My husband is gone, and I am doing my best. But my words fell on deaf ears. To them, I was just another debtor, another name on a list. And every time I hung up, my situation felt even more impossible. The pressure from the lenders was relentless. When the calls did not shake me enough, they escalated. Men started showing up at my door unannounced. I would open it cautiously, only to be met with cold stares and blunt reminders of the debt. Their presence was suffocating, as if they were waiting for me to break. "You have a month," one of them said, handing me a slip of paper. "Get the money, or we will make sure you pay another way." I stared at the paper in disbelief. The amount owed was far more than I could ever imagine repaying. It felt like drowning in an ocean with no way out, each wave hitting harder than the last. Every time I thought I could catch my breath, the reality of my financial situation dragged me under again. Desperate, I took any job I could find. I cleaned houses, worked late nights at diners, and even did odd jobs for neighbors, all while trying to hide my growing belly. I could not afford to slow down, not with the constant threats looming over me. But my body, exhausted and worn, had other plans. One night, as I was scrubbing floors at a small convenience store, my vision blurred. I tried to shake it off, but the world around me spun. I felt myself sway and grabbed onto the counter to steady myself. But it was no use. The last thing I remembered was the cold tile floor rushing up to meet me before everything went black. When I came to, I was lying in a hospital bed, a nurse checking my vitals. My heart raced with panic as my hands instinctively went to my belly. The nurse, noticing my distress, placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "Your babies are fine," she said softly. "But you are pushing yourself too hard. You need to rest." Rest. The word felt like a cruel joke. How could I rest when my entire life was falling apart? But the nurse's words echoed in my mind. I knew I had to be careful. I was not just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for my children. With no other choice, I cut back on my hours, which only made things worse. The bills piled up faster than I could pay them, and the threats from the lenders grew more intense. I tried selling what little I had of value, but it barely made a dent. Every penny I earned seemed to vanish into the void of debt, leaving me with nothing. The stress became unbearable. There were nights when I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I would survive another day. My mind raced with dark thoughts, doubts creeping in like shadows in the night. I felt trapped, suffocating under the weight of my situation. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered my babies. They were all I had left of Liam, and even though he had left me with this mess, I could not abandon them. They were my light in the darkness, the only reason I kept going. By the time my twins were born, I was running on fumes. I held them in my arms, their tiny fingers gripping mine, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself a moment of peace. In that hospital room, surrounded by silence, I made a vow. No matter what, I would protect them. I would find a way to survive, even if it meant sacrificing every last part of myself. But reality waited for me outside those hospital doors. The world had not changed while I was in the hospital. The lenders were still there, waiting for their payment. And now, with 2 mouths to feed, my situation was even more dire. The fear, once a low hum in the background, became a constant roar in my ears. Weeks turned into months, and my life continued in a blur of sleepless nights and grueling workdays. My twins, Jacob and Lily, now crawling and giggling, were the only bright spots in my otherwise bleak existence. But every smile, every laugh, was tinged with the ever-present threat hanging over our heads. It was not until one particularly bad day, when the phone rang yet again with another demand for payment, that I realized something had to change. I could not keep living like this, drowning in fear, waiting for the next knock at the door. I needed a way out. And when the opportunity finally came, it was not in the form of a lifeline but rather a chance to board a luxury cruise, a job that, while difficult, promised just enough money to pay off the debt that had haunted me for years. It was my only option, and without hesitation I took it. 7 years had passed, but the weight on my shoulders had not eased. If anything, it had grown heavier. Jacob and Lily were now 7 years old, bright-eyed and full of life, completely unaware of the danger that always seemed to lurk in the background. I had done my best to shield them from the harsh reality of our situation, but every day felt like a battle I was not sure I could win. Despite working tirelessly at multiple jobs, I had barely made a dent in the debt. The lenders were as relentless as ever, showing up at my door or calling whenever I fell behind on a payment, which seemed to happen more often than not. The threats grew darker, their patience running thin. There were moments when I feared for my life, and worse, for the safety of my children. I knew I could not continue living like this. I was worn down, my body exhausted from years of overwork, and the constant fear was starting to take its toll on my mind. The children noticed the bags under my eyes, the way my smile never quite reached my face anymore, but I could not let them know the truth. As far as they were concerned, their mom was strong, always holding everything together, even when it felt like my world was falling apart. One evening, after a long shift at the diner, I sat in my cramped apartment, going over the bills scattered across the table. My hands trembled as I stared at the numbers that did not add up. I had enough for rent, but that was it. There would be no money left for food, let alone the next payment to the lenders. A knock at the door startled me. I knew who it was before I even answered. My heart raced, fear coiling in my chest as I cracked open the door. It was one of the men who worked for the lenders, a hulking figure with cold eyes that never softened, no matter how much I begged for more time. He was the face I had come to dread, a reminder that the clock was ticking. "You are late again?" he said, his voice flat, as if we were discussing something as mundane as the weather. "I just need a little more time," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "I swear, I will have the money soon." The man's expression did not change. "You have been saying that for years, Emily. The boss is getting tired of waiting." My throat tightened. I knew what that meant. I had heard stories of people who crossed these men, people who were never seen again. I had always managed to scrape by, always found a way to make just enough to keep them at bay, but I was running out of options. "I have a job lined up," I said quickly, hoping to buy myself more time. "I'm starting in a few days. It is a good one. I will be able to pay off everything, I promise." The man raised an eyebrow, finally showing a hint of interest. "A job? Doing what?" I swallowed, my palms sweaty. "It is on a cruise ship, a luxury cruise. I will be working as a waitress." For the first time, the man seemed to consider my words. A cruise, huh? That could work. But you better make sure it does, or we will come collecting, and it will not just be money we take. The implication hung heavy in the air. I nodded quickly, my pulse pounding in my ears. I watched as the man turned and left, my entire body trembling once the door clicked shut. The relief was temporary, but it was enough. The job on the cruise had been my lifeline, the only chance I had to get out from under this crushing debt. If I could save up enough during my time at sea, I could finally put an end to this nightmare. The next few days were a blur of preparation. I arranged for my neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Reynolds, to watch the twins while I was gone. It broke my heart to leave them, but this was my only chance to secure a future for them. I had no choice. The day I left, Jacob and Lily clung to me, their small arms wrapping around my waist as if they sensed how hard this was for me. "When will you be back, Mommy?" Jacob asked, his brown eyes wide with concern. "In a few weeks," I replied, kneeling down to hug them tightly. "And when I come back, things are going to be better. I promise." Lily, always the quieter of the two, simply nodded and buried her face in my neck. The lump in my throat grew as I pulled away, kissing their foreheads before handing them off to Mrs. Reynolds. As I boarded the ship, the enormity of what I was doing began to sink in. This cruise was supposed to be my salvation, but as the massive ship loomed above me, a sense of dread filled my chest. I had not been away from the twins for this long since they were born, and I could not shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. The cruise ship itself was a floating palace, gleaming white against the blue of the ocean. Guests in designer clothes strolled along the deck, laughing and sipping champagne, completely oblivious to the struggles of people like me. I donned my uniform and took my place among the staff, my mind focused on the money I desperately needed to make. For the first few days, everything seemed normal. I worked long hours, my feet aching by the end of each shift, but it was a small price to pay for the money I was earning. I kept to myself, avoiding conversations with the other staff, my thoughts always on my kids, my debt, and the future I was trying to build. But then, on the fourth day, as I carried a tray of drinks to a table in the high-end restaurant, my world tilted on its axis. There, sitting at one of the tables, dressed in a sharp suit, was Liam. I froze in place, my heart hammering in my chest as I stared at the man before me. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. It could not be him. It just could not. Liam had died 7 years ago. He had left me alone to pick up the pieces, to raise our children, and to battle the mountain of debt that nearly swallowed me whole. But there he was, alive. More than alive. He looked polished. His hair was neatly styled, his suit crisp and expensive, and he sat with a casual confidence that made my stomach churn. And beside him was a woman, beautiful, with flowing dark hair and a smile that radiated warmth. Sarah's grip tightened on the tray she was holding, her knuckles white. Her thoughts spiraled. How could this be happening? The man who had disappeared from my life, the man whose body had never been found, was sitting a few feet away from me, alive and well. What did that mean? Had he been hiding all this time? Why had he left me? As soon as my shift ended, I hurried back to my small cabin. My pulse raced, my hands shook as I tried to process what I had just seen. Liam. He had been there, sitting like everything was normal, like he had not shattered my entire world. My head swam with questions, none of them with answers. And yet one thing became clear: I had to confront him. I had to know the truth. Later that evening, I paced the deck, waiting for the restaurant to close, rehearsing what I would say. But when the moment came, when I finally saw him leaving with that same woman on his arm, all my rehearsed words vanished. Instead, pure instinct drove my feet forward, my heart pounding in my ears as I stepped into his path. Liam? My voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. But it was enough. He stopped dead in his tracks, his body stiffening as he turned to face me. Our eyes met, and for a moment, something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Maybe even guilt. But just as quickly it was gone. He blinked, his face hardening into a mask of indifference. "Excuse me? Do I know you?" he asked, his voice cool, detached. My blood ran cold. He was pretending. He was standing right in front of me, alive, and he was pretending he did not even know me. My jaw clenched as anger flared inside me. 7 years of pain and confusion boiled to the surface, crashing down on me all at once. "You know who I am," I hissed, stepping closer, my eyes burning with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Do not you dare pretend like you do not." The woman beside him looked confused, glancing between us. "Liam? What is this? Who is she?" Liam let out a sigh, his eyes narrowing as he looked at me. "You must be mistaken," he said flatly. "I do not know you. Now, if you will excuse us, we have dinner reservations." He started to turn away, but I was not going to let him slip through my fingers that easily. I grabbed his arm, yanking him back to face me. The woman beside him gasped, and Liam's eyes darkened. His calm facade slipped, just for a moment. "How could you do this?" My voice cracked as I spoke. "How could you leave me? I thought you were dead. I had to raise our children alone. I had to face everything you left behind. And you have just been, what? Living this life with her?" Liam's jaw clenched, and for a second, I thought I saw regret flash in his eyes. But then he pulled his arm free from my grip, his face hardening. "You do not know what you are talking about," he said coldly. "And if you do not leave us alone, I will call security." I stared at him, my heart breaking all over again. I wanted to scream, to cry, to shake him until he admitted the truth. But something in his voice, something in his posture, told me that was not going to happen tonight. He was not going to admit anything. Not here. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling as I stepped back. The woman beside Liam clutched his arm, pulling him closer, as if to shield him from whatever chaos I had brought into their evening. But I was not done. Not by a long shot. "Fine," I said, my voice low but steady. "You can keep pretending all you want, but I know the truth. And I am not going to let you get away with this." Liam's eyes locked onto mine for a long moment, tension thick between us. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, the woman on his arm. I watched as they disappeared into the crowd, my chest tight with a mix of fury and devastation. I stood there, alone on the deck, the sound of the waves crashing against the ship echoing in my ears. The Liam I had once known, the man I had loved, the father of my children, was gone. In his place was a stranger, someone who had faked his own death and left me to pick up the pieces. But I was not going to let him get away with it. Not this time. Not after everything he had put me through. I had come this far, survived this long, and I was not about to give up now. The next few days on the cruise passed in a blur. I moved through my shifts like a ghost, my mind spinning with thoughts of Liam. Every time I replayed that moment on the deck, a mixture of fury and heartbreak coursed through me. How could he have left me? How could he have left our children, faked his own death, and built a new life with that woman? I did not even know who I was angrier with, him, for abandoning me and the twins, or myself, for still feeling that ache of longing, that hollowed-out space in my chest where the love for him used to be. Every day, I would catch a glimpse of him on the ship, laughing with his new companion, living in a world that was so far removed from the life we had once shared. And every time I saw him, it twisted the knife deeper. I needed answers. And soon. Late one night, when my shift finally ended, I made up my mind. I could not wait any longer. I needed to confront him again, away from the prying eyes of guests, away from the woman who clung to his arm like he was the center of her universe. I knew where he was staying. I had seen the suite assignments when I first started. And now, standing in the shadowed hallway outside his door, I felt my heart race with anticipation and dread. With a deep breath, I knocked. There was a long silence, and for a moment, I thought he would not answer. Maybe he was asleep, or maybe he was ignoring me, hoping I would just go away. But then, the door creaked open. And there he was. Liam stood in the doorway, his face unreadable, the same carefully constructed mask of indifference he had worn the night we first saw each other. "What do you want, Emily?" His voice was flat, almost bored. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I want the truth, Liam. I deserve that much." He sighed and stepped aside, gesturing for me to come in. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of what I was about to hear pressing down on me. But then I stepped inside, the door closing softly behind me. And finally, I was going to get the answers I had waited 7 years for. The truth was out. Liam had left me and our children, faked his death, and now he was living a life of luxury with a woman who probably had no idea of the mess he had left behind. My heart still pounded in my chest, my hands shaking from the confrontation, but now that the shock had worn off, something new began to take root. Determination. I had spent years struggling to survive, working myself to the bone for the twins, all while carrying the burden of Liam's betrayal. I had sacrificed everything. And yet, here he was, walking away from his responsibilities like none of it had ever happened. It was not fair, and I was not going to let him get away with it. Liam had always been good at hiding his true self. He could charm anyone, make them believe he was someone worth trusting. But I knew the truth now. And with the truth came power. I had something he did not expect: knowledge. I knew what he had done, how he had abandoned us. Worse, he had done it to run from debt. Debt that was now crushing me and threatening the safety of my children. For the first time in years, I felt a surge of control. I was not going to be the victim anymore. I was not going to let Liam's decisions dictate my life. It was time to fight back. The next morning, I wasted no time. My first step was gathering as much information as I could. I started with the ship's guest records, easily accessible to staff members who needed to know the passengers' identities. There, in black and white, was Liam's new identity. He had changed his last name, adopted a new persona. But to me, he was still the man who had destroyed everything. Next, I took a quiet moment in the staff break room to dig deeper into his companion. The woman, named Claudia, had booked the cruise as part of a lavish getaway. She and Liam were listed as husband and wife. It made me sick to think of the life they had built on lies. I knew I could not confront Liam head-on again, not without a plan. My years of dealing with the lenders had taught me that survival was not just about strength, it was about strategy. I needed to be smart about this. If I went to the authorities, I needed evidence. And if I went to the lenders, I had to make sure they did not come after me or the twins. That night, after my shift, I made my way to the ship's communication center. I had one contact that could help me, an old acquaintance from my neighborhood who had worked in investigations for years. He was not exactly on the right side of the law, but that did not matter to me. I needed someone who could find dirt on Liam, and fast. I sent a discreet message, detailing what I had discovered about Liam, his new identity, and the life he had been living. I asked for any information that could link him back to his old debts, or even better, any evidence of illegal activities he had been involved in. It did not take long for my contact to reply. A few hours later, I received a response that made my blood run cold. Liam had not just been running from debt. He had been involved in a massive scam, one that had targeted a wealthy businessman back in our hometown. The plan had been simple: fake his death, disappear, and leave me to deal with the fallout. He had cleaned out our accounts before vanishing, leaving me with nothing. But there was more. My contact provided me with documents, bank transfers, fraudulent contracts, and even emails between Liam and his accomplices. The evidence was damning. If I took this to the authorities, Liam would not just be facing debt collectors, he would be facing jail time. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the files, the weight of what I was holding sinking in. This was it. This was how I was going to get my life back. With these documents, I could not only clear myself of the debt, but I could also make sure Liam paid for everything he had done. But there was still the matter of the lenders. I knew that if I did not handle things carefully, they could come after me once Liam was out of the picture. They had already proven how ruthless they could be, and I could not risk putting my children in more danger. I needed a way to involve them without becoming their next target. The answer came to me in a moment of clarity. If I turned Liam over to the lenders before going to the authorities, I could use his debt to my advantage. I could negotiate my own safety in exchange for delivering Liam to them. After all, they did not care who paid as long as they got their money. It was risky, but it was the only plan that made sense. I could not trust the authorities to handle this quickly enough. The lenders had connections, and if anyone could track down Liam and make him face the consequences, it was them. With the evidence in hand, I felt a new sense of purpose. I was not the same woman I had been 7 years ago, broken and afraid. I was stronger now, harder. And I was not going to let Liam destroy my life any longer. I made the call. The call was short and to the point. I explained my situation to the lenders, carefully crafting my words to make it clear that I was not their enemy. I was not running away. In fact, I was handing over something far more valuable than money. Liam had gotten away with his deceit for far too long, and it was time for him to face the consequences. The man on the other end of the line, someone I had only dealt with through intermediaries before, listened silently. His voice was low and cold, exactly as I had expected. But when I mentioned Liam and the evidence I had, there was a pause. "Are you telling me you can give us the man who owes us millions?" he asked, his tone sharpening. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady despite the fear prickling at the back of my neck. "I have proof of where he is, the crimes he committed, and how he has been living under a new identity. I can give you everything you need to find him." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning as he processed my offer. I knew I was playing with fire, but this was my only option. If I did not handle this perfectly, I could end up on the wrong side of their wrath. Finally, the man spoke again. "And what do you want in return?" "My safety," I said, my voice unwavering. "I have been paying off his debt for years. I want that debt erased. And I want to make sure that my children and I are left alone, once and for all. You get Liam and all the money he owes you. But I walk away clean. No more threats. No more visits." Another pause. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for his response, praying that this was the right move. I could not afford for this to go wrong. "All right," the man finally said, his voice colder than before. "But if you are lying, if this is some kind of trick, you will regret it." "I am not lying," I said quickly, my voice firm. "I will send you the documents tonight. You will see for yourself that it is all real." He did not say anything more before hanging up, leaving me alone with the weight of what I had just set in motion. That night, I gathered all the evidence my contact had sent me, the bank records, the emails, the fraudulent contracts, and packaged them into a secure file. I sent everything to the lenders, along with the details of Liam's whereabouts on the ship and his new identity. It was all there, undeniable and irrefutable. And now, there was no turning back. Once the message was sent, I collapsed onto my bed, my body heavy with exhaustion. The weight of the past few days finally caught up with me, but there was a strange sense of relief in knowing that I had taken action. For the first time in years, I felt like I was not just surviving, I was fighting back. The next morning, I went about my duties on the ship as usual, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. I tried to keep my head down, blending in with the other staff members, but every time I passed a group of security personnel or saw a guest I did not recognize, my heart skipped a beat. The waiting was the hardest part. Hours passed, and still, nothing happened. I began to wonder if the lenders had received my message, if they were planning something, or if I had miscalculated entirely. Doubt gnawed at the edges of my resolve, and I found myself checking my phone obsessively, waiting for some kind of sign that my plan had worked. Then, just after midday, I noticed something. There was a sudden flurry of activity near the main deck. Security guards were quietly moving through the crowd, and I spotted one of the senior officers heading toward the VIP suites, where Liam was staying. My pulse quickened. This was it. I followed at a distance, careful to stay out of sight. I watched as the security team reached Liam's suite and knocked on the door. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still. Then, the door opened, and 2 guards stepped inside. I could not see Liam's face, but I imagined the shock, the panic that must have gripped him as they informed him that his time was up. Moments later, Liam emerged, flanked by the security officers. His expression was a mix of confusion and anger. But as they escorted him through the ship, our eyes met. Recognition flashed in his gaze. He knew. He knew this was my doing. He did not struggle, did not try to run. He simply walked with them, his head held high, as if he still had some semblance of control over the situation. But I knew better. He was finished. His lies, his betrayal, they had all finally caught up with him. As they led him off the ship, I stayed hidden, watching from a distance. My breath caught in my throat as the reality of it all sank in. Liam was gone. And with him, the crushing weight of the past 7 years began to lift. The debt, the fear, the endless struggle to survive, it was over. I had done it. I had taken control of my life again. But even as relief washed over me, I knew this was not the end. There were still pieces to pick up, still wounds to heal. And there was still the matter of Liam's accomplices, like Claudia, who had played their own roles in the deception. For now, though, I allowed myself a moment of victory. The hardest part was behind me. And no matter what came next, I knew I had the strength to face it. I watched from the shadows as Liam was led off the ship. His head was held high, but I could see the tightness in his jaw, the tension in his posture. He was trying to maintain control, to keep up appearances. But there was no escaping what was coming. I felt a strange mix of emotions watching him: relief, satisfaction, and even a small, bitter pang of sorrow for the man I had once loved, the man I thought I knew. But that man was gone. In his place was someone who had betrayed me, abandoned our children, and created a life of lies. As the security team escorted him toward a waiting car on the dock, I knew it was only a matter of time before the lenders made their move. I had no illusions about what they would do once they had him. Liam had dug his own grave, and now he was going to lie in it. But there was still one loose end: Claudia. I had seen her with Liam on the ship, laughing, carefree, completely unaware of the storm about to descend. Claudia was not just an innocent bystander. She had been a part of Liam's life for years, and I suspected she knew more than she let on. There was no way Liam could have pulled off his disappearance without help, and I was certain Claudia had played a role. After Liam was taken away, I decided it was time for one last confrontation. I needed answers, needed to know just how deep Claudia's involvement went. The cruise was not over, and Claudia was still on board, blissfully ignorant of the chaos about to hit her. I waited until later that evening, when most of the guests had retreated to their suites or were enjoying the late-night entertainment. The ship's corridors were quiet, the soft hum of the engines the only sound as I made my way to Claudia's suite. My hands trembled slightly, not out of fear, but out of anticipation. I had waited for this moment for years, and now it was finally here. I knocked on the door, and after a few moments, it swung open. Claudia stood there, dressed in an elegant silk robe, her face creasing in confusion as she recognized me. "Can I help you?" Claudia asked, her voice smooth, polished, like she did not have a care in the world. I forced a smile. "We need to talk." Claudia glanced over her shoulder as if checking to see if anyone else was around, then turned back to me with a small, condescending smirk. "About what, exactly?" "About Liam," I said, stepping forward, my voice low and firm. "About what he has done, about what you have been a part of." Claudia's smirk faded, replaced by a slight narrowing of her eyes. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Do not play dumb," I snapped, my frustration bubbling over. "You have been with him for years. You have lived off the money he stole, the life he built on lies. You know exactly what I am talking about." Claudia's expression shifted, the mask of indifference slipping just slightly. Look, whatever issues you have with Liam are between you two. I do not know anything about his past. Liar, I said, stepping closer, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. You have known all along. You helped him disappear. You knew he left me, left his children with nothing. You knew, and you did not care. Claudia's eyes flickered with something, guilt, fear, or maybe just annoyance. She crossed her arms and leaned against the door frame, her tone sharp. I did not know the full story, all right? He told me you were out of the picture, that he had no choice but to leave. I did not ask questions. We were happy. Happy? I echoed, my voice rising in disbelief. Happy? While I was struggling to feed our children? While I was being threatened, harassed, forced to pay off his debts? Claudia's face paled slightly, but she quickly composed herself. I did not know it was that bad. Did not know or did not care? I shot back, my eyes blazing with fury. You were too busy living in luxury to bother asking what happened to the life he left behind. Claudia flinched, her confidence wavering for the first time. She shifted on her feet, glancing around nervously, as if searching for an escape from the conversation. Look, I am sorry for what happened to you, but Liam made his own choices. I was not responsible for that. You were complicit, I said, my voice steady, the rage simmering just beneath the surface. You helped him live a lie, and now he is paying the price for it. But do not think you are getting away with it either. Claudia's eyes widened in alarm. What do you mean? I have given the authorities everything, I continued, my tone cold and calculated. All the evidence, Liam's debts, his fraud, and every single lie he told. They know about him, and they know about you. It is only a matter of time before they come for you too. Claudia's breath caught, her hands gripping the edge of the door as panic flashed across her face. You cannot be serious. I did not do anything wrong. You let him destroy my life, I said, my voice shaking with the weight of years of betrayal. And you stood by and watched while he did it. So yes, I am serious, and trust me, you will not be able to hide behind Liam anymore. For a moment, Claudia was silent, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for a way out of this nightmare. She looked at me, and for the first time, there was no arrogance, no disdain, only fear. You are making a mistake, Claudia whispered, her voice trembling. I shook my head, my gaze unwavering. No, the only mistake I made was trusting Liam. But that is over now. And so is this. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving Claudia standing alone in the doorway, her face pale and her body frozen in place. As I made my way back to my cabin, the weight of everything I had done finally began to lift. Liam was gone, and soon Claudia would be too. The past that had haunted me for years was finally coming to an end. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The following morning, I woke to the sounds of the ship's engines humming steadily beneath my cabin. The events of the previous night felt distant, like a dream, but the reality quickly set in. Liam had been taken off the ship. Claudia was likely in a state of panic, realizing that her comfortable life was about to unravel. And me, I was finally free from the weight that had suffocated me for so many years. The tension that had gripped me for so long began to ease. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I breathed deeply, without fear gnawing at my insides. I had done it. I had taken control of my life, faced down the man who had left me broken, and handed him over to face justice. It was not the kind of closure I had imagined, but it was the closure I needed. As I prepared for the day, a soft knock on my door made me pause. My heart skipped a beat, and my mind flashed to all the possible scenarios. I was not sure what to expect, but I was not afraid anymore. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. To my surprise, it was not a member of the crew or a lender's enforcer. It was the ship's security officer, the same one I had seen escorting Liam off the ship. "Ms. Carter?" he asked, his expression serious, but not unkind. "Yes, that is me," I replied, a touch of anxiety creeping into my voice despite my newfound strength. "I thought you would like to know," the officer began, adjusting his cap. The man you identified as Liam Carter, was taken into custody without incident. He is being transported to local authorities. And from what I understand, they will be pursuing criminal charges. There is quite a lot of evidence stacked against him." I nodded, my pulse quickening. "Thank you for letting me know. I was not sure what would happen after they took him off the ship." The officer gave me a small, knowing smile. "I have seen a lot of things in my time, but people like him, they never get away with it forever. It was only a matter of time. You did the right thing by coming forward." I did not expect the wave of emotion that hit me at his words. It was not relief, or even satisfaction. It was exhaustion. The kind that sets in after years of fighting, of holding it all together for so long. My knees felt weak, and for a moment I had to steady myself against the doorframe. The officer noticed. "Are you all right, Miss Carter?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "I will be. It has been a long time coming." The officer tipped his hat, his expression softening. "I can imagine. Take care of yourself, all right? You have been through a lot." I thanked him, closing the door softly behind him. As I leaned against it, the enormity of it all settled over me like a heavy blanket. Liam was finally going to pay for what he had done, for abandoning me, for leaving me to shoulder the debt, for faking his death and living a life of lies. It was over. And yet, as the minutes passed, a strange emptiness lingered where my anger had once burned so fiercely. I had spent years fueled by the betrayal, by the need to protect my children and survive. Now, with that burden lifted, I did not know what came next. After a few moments, I made my way to the window of my small cabin and looked out at the vast ocean. The sunlight danced on the waves, the horizon stretching out infinitely before me. It was beautiful, peaceful even, but it was also a reminder that my journey was not over yet. I had fought so hard to survive, and now I needed to figure out how to live again. My thoughts drifted to Jacob and Lily, the reason I had kept going all these years. They had been my light in the darkest of times, my reason to wake up each day and keep pushing forward, no matter how impossible it seemed. And now, I had the chance to give them the life they deserved, free from fear, free from debt, free from the ghosts of their father's betrayal. It was time to go home. As the ship docked in the bustling port city later that afternoon, I gathered my few belongings and made my way to the gangway. The noise of the port was overwhelming, the shouts of dockworkers, the rumble of trucks, the clatter of suitcases being unloaded. But for me, it all faded into the background. My focus was on getting back to my children. I had arranged for Mrs. Reynolds to pick me up at the port and take me back home. The thought of seeing my children again filled me with a warmth that I had not felt in years. For the first time in a long while, I was returning to them without the weight of fear and uncertainty hanging over me. As I stepped off the ship, I spotted Mrs. Reynolds' familiar old car idling near the curb. The elderly woman waved from the driver's seat, a smile spreading across her weathered face as I approached. My heart swelled with gratitude. Mrs. Reynolds had been my rock during the darkest times, helping me care for the twins when things seemed impossible. "Welcome back, dear," Mrs. Reynolds said warmly as I climbed into the passenger seat. "How was the trip?" I paused for a moment, my gaze drifting out the window as the city whirred by. "It was complicated," I finally said, a small smile playing on my lips. "But it is over now, all of it." Mrs. Reynolds patted my hand gently. "I am glad to hear it. The twins are going to be so happy to see you. They have been talking about you nonstop since you left." A lump formed in my throat at the thought of my children. I have missed them so much. The rest of the drive passed in comfortable silence, and soon, we arrived at the small apartment building I called home. As I stepped out of the car, my heart raced with anticipation. Jacob and Lily would be waiting for me inside, their faces lighting up when they saw me. I could not wait to hold them, to tell them that everything was going to be all right. For the first time in 7 years, I could finally believe it. I stepped out of the car and made my way toward the apartment building, the familiar brick facade a welcome sight. My heart raced as I climbed the stairs, my mind filled with thoughts of Jacob and Lily. 7 years of struggle, of sleepless nights and endless worry, had led to this moment. I was coming home, really coming home this time, with the knowledge that the past no longer had a grip on me. As I reached the door to my apartment, I could already hear the faint sound of giggles coming from inside. I smiled, my hand hovering over the doorknob for a moment, savoring the anticipation. Then, with a deep breath, I opened the door. The sight that greeted me made my heart swell. Jacob and Lily were sitting on the floor with Mrs. Reynolds, surrounded by a jumble of toys and coloring books. The twins looked up in unison, their eyes lighting up with excitement the moment they saw me. "Mommy!" Jacob shouted, jumping to his feet and running toward me. Lily was not far behind, her face glowing with joy. I dropped to my knees, arms wide open as the twins barreled into me, nearly knocking me over with the force of their hugs. I wrapped my arms around them, pulling them close, my heart aching with a mixture of happiness and relief. For so long, I had dreamed of this moment, of holding them without the weight of fear pressing down on me. "I missed you both so much," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion as I kissed the top of their heads. "We missed you too, Mommy," Lily chimed in, her small hands clutching my shirt tightly, as if afraid I might disappear again. Mrs. Reynolds stood up slowly, stretching her stiff back before giving me a warm smile. "They have been asking about you every day. They will be happy to hear you are back for good now." I nodded, still holding on to my children. "Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds. I do not know what I would have done without you." The older woman waved her hand dismissively, though her eyes gleamed with affection. "Nonsense. I am just glad you are all right. That is what matters." I smiled, but there was a weight to my expression that Mrs. Reynolds seemed to notice. The older woman walked over and patted my shoulder gently. "Well, I will leave you to your reunion. You have earned some time with these little ones." With that, Mrs. Reynolds gathered her things and made her way toward the door, pausing only once to give me a final nod of encouragement. "You are a strong woman, Emily, stronger than most. Do not ever forget that." As the door closed behind her, I sat back on the floor with Jacob and Lily, letting myself get lost in the sound of their laughter and the warmth of their hugs. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe, like the crushing weight that had been sitting on my chest was lifting. We spent the rest of the afternoon together, playing with toys, coloring, and sharing stories. I watched my children with a kind of wonder, realizing just how much I had missed during the years I had spent struggling to keep them afloat. I had been so consumed by survival, by the debt and the fear, that I had missed out on these little moments, the moments that really mattered. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the evening sky turned shades of pink and orange, I tucked Jacob and Lily into bed. They were both exhausted, their eyes drooping as I read them their favorite bedtime story. Lily curled up under her blanket, clutching her stuffed bunny, while Jacob lay beside her, his breathing growing slower as he drifted off to sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, watching them, memorizing the peaceful rise and fall of their chests. For the first time in 7 years, I knew we were finally safe. And for the first time in a long time, I knew we had a future worth looking forward to. His eyes barely open as he listened to my soothing voice. "Are you really staying home this time, Mommy?" Jacob asked sleepily, his small voice cutting through the quiet. My heart ached at the question. I leaned down and kissed his forehead gently. "Yes, sweetie, I am home for good. No more leaving." "Good," Jacob murmured, his eyes fluttering shut as he drifted off to sleep. Lily was already asleep, her soft snores filling the room. I sat there for a moment, watching my children, my heart swelling with love and a deep sense of peace. They were safe. They were finally safe. As I quietly slipped out of the room and closed the door behind me, I walked into the living room and sank into the worn couch. The apartment was small and modest, but it was home. It was ours. And for the first time in years, I did not feel like a prisoner in my own life. I was free to start over, free to build a new future for myself and my children. But the weight of the past still lingered at the edges of my mind. Liam was gone, but the memories of his betrayal, the years of struggle, were not something I could just forget. I had survived, yes. But now, I had to figure out how to live again, how to rebuild my life without the constant fear of what was lurking around the corner. I knew it would not be easy. The scars ran deep, and there would still be difficult days ahead. But as I sat there, surrounded by the quiet hum of the apartment, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Hope. I did not have all the answers yet. But for now, that was enough. In the days that followed, I settled into a new rhythm. Life was still far from easy. There were bills to pay, groceries to buy, and the ever-present task of raising two energetic 7-year-olds on my own. But it felt different now. Lighter somehow. There was no longer the constant shadow of Liam's betrayal hanging over me. No debt collectors knocking at my door. No fear that everything would crumble around me at any moment. For the first time, I could make decisions about my future, and my children's, without the weight of the past pressing down on me. One evening, as I sat at the small kitchen table, I found myself thinking about everything that had led me to this point. Liam's arrest had made the news. His crimes exposed for the world to see. He would face years in prison, maybe even a lifetime, depending on the full scope of his financial fraud. And Claudia? I was not sure where she had ended up, but it did not matter anymore. I had done my part. As I sipped my tea, a quiet sense of closure settled over me. The man who had caused me so much pain was no longer a part of my life. It was time to let go, to truly start fresh. The next day, I woke up early, the sunlight streaming through the curtains as the sounds of the city outside began to filter in. I could hear Jacob and Lily giggling in their room, and the sound brought a smile to my face. These moments, these simple, beautiful moments, were what mattered now. I had spent so many years just trying to survive that I had forgotten how to live. But now, I had the chance to build something better for myself and my children, and I was not going to waste it. After breakfast, I took the twins out for a walk to the nearby park. It was a bright, warm day, and the park was filled with families, couples, and children running through the grass. Jacob and Lily darted off toward the swings, their laughter ringing through the air as they played. I watched them, my heart swelling with a quiet, steady joy. I sat on a bench, letting the peacefulness of the scene wash over me. For the first time in years, I did not feel like I was constantly waiting for the next disaster. I did not feel like I was always on the edge, ready for something to go wrong. There was no fear here, just the sound of my children laughing and the feeling of the sun warming my skin. As I watched them, I thought about all the lessons I had learned over the past 7 years. I had learned that strength was not just about surviving. It was about finding a way to keep going, even when everything felt impossible. It was about fighting for what mattered, about protecting the people you loved, even when you did not have all the answers. And I had learned that sometimes, letting go was the hardest, but most important thing to do. Liam had been a part of my life for so long. First as the man I had loved, then as the man who had betrayed me, and finally as the man I had defeated. But now, he was gone, and I was free to build a new future, one that did not involve the ghosts of my past. As the day wore on, I found myself thinking less and less about what had happened with Liam and more about the life ahead of me. There was so much possibility now, so much to look forward to. I was not sure where life would take me next, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to find out. Later that evening, after tucking Jacob and Lily into bed, I stood by the window of my small apartment and gazed out at the city. The lights twinkled in the distance, cars honking softly as the city buzzed with life. It was peaceful in its own way, a reminder that the world kept turning, no matter what had happened in the past. A sense of calm settled over me as I stood there, watching the city. For years, I had been waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the past to catch up with me, waiting for something to go wrong. But now, there was nothing left to wait for. The past was behind me, and the future was mine to shape. As I turned away from the window and prepared for bed, a soft smile played on my lips. The road ahead would not be easy, but it was mine. And that, more than anything, was what mattered. For the first time in years, I fell asleep without the weight of worry pressing down on my chest. I had won my freedom, not just from Liam, but from the fear and doubt that had held me back for so long. Now, I could finally live. And for me, that was the greatest victory of all.